Hey, this is Meleika of Evanston Live TV, and I have with me today, I feel so honored to have this gentleman with us on Evanston Live TV, Mr. Daniel Biss. Welcome.
Meleika, the honor is mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, so you and I had a great conversation last week, and I was just impressed that you're like calling around, you're wanting to hear people's views, what their concerns are, just wanting to know what's on people's minds, and I think that speaks volumes about you.
Well, thank you for saying that. First of all, I learned a lot in our conversation. I hope it's not the last one we have. But there's 75,000 people live in Evanston, and we've got little pockets of the community where everyone knows everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that no one knows everyone. That whoever you think you know, there's always somebody else out there who you have something to learn from. And I'm approaching this by saying, I got to make sure I'm listening to people across town and lifting up voices across town. And I know that I'm going to learn and grow as I do that. And hopefully it'll make me a better mayor also.
So you were former senator, state
Mm-hmm.
senator. So why do you want to be mayor of Evanston now?
I get that question all the time. Look, we are having a national reckoning on questions of racial justice, on questions of policing, on questions of segregation and housing. And, thank God we're having that conversation. But let's remember, we're thinking about it in the context of a presidential election and who's going to be in Congress. But, many, if not most of those decisions are worked out at the municipal level, and municipalities set zoning policy and housing policy, and we do public safety. And I just think that a community like Evanston that wants to see itself as progressive and forward looking has an opportunity in this moment, especially to really lead in these critical issues. And I think we have a responsibility to do that, not just the opportunity. And so to me, it's obviously a very difficult time in municipal government, but I think it's a really, really important time, and to have a chance to play a role in that would be very meaningful. And so that's why this race is something that I wanted to get involved in, and that's why we're having this conversation.
All right. Yeah, there's quite a bit going on in the country, and it definitely impacts cities like Evanston. We have COVID-19. Race has always been an issue, but for whatever reason, people are waking up to it now. I'm happy, better late than never. We do have our issues here in Evanston. Let's attack the race issue first. Evanston does pride itself on being diverse and inclusive, but many would say it just appears that way, but it's not really that way. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you see going on in the Black community here in Evanston?
Well, I think there's good and there's a lot left to work on, right? So Evanston is diverse in the sense that it's literally diverse. There's, white and Black and Latinx and Asian Native people in Evanston who, at least at the high school level, go to school together. Though, by the way, our neighborhoods are pretty darn segregated, which means that our elementary schools are relatively segregated. So I think that, you put it really well, that people are waking up to racial issues now. And that's an incredible thing to say, given this country's history, given this community's history. And I actually don't think it's that people are waking up to the fact that racism is a problem. I think people, or that structural racism is real even, I think people are finally so confronted with the most visceral and violent and ugly consequences that they finally said, okay, we've actually got to do something instead of continuing to talk about the problem. And so I think that's the moment that we got to seize, and not turn the kind of feeling of we got to do something into just another set of conversations that then don't go somewhere concrete. So what does that mean? I mean, to me, a lot of it is about housing and affordability and segregation. And there's, we know the ugly history of redlining and essentially, municipally enforced segregation that used to exist. We don't have that anymore, but we still have a segregated city to a great extent, and partially because of things like the zoning policies that make affordability more and more out of reach for more and more people. So I think that's one critical thing that we absolutely have to front load in our work. I think that we have a habit in Evanston, and I'm speaking now about white folks in Evanston. I think we have a habit of saying, we're so enlightened, we're so progressive, that it's a really shame there's race problems somewhere else, and it's great that those problems don't exist here. And I think we have to just, banish that way of thinking from our minds, that racism is not a bad thing that happens in one person's heart. It's an evil system that exists across our society, and everybody has a role to play in dismantling racism, however noble and pure your heart may be, at least in your own mind. And I think that we have to work on the policing issues. That obviously we have not identical policing issues to some of the most horrific and graphic things that we've seen recently, whether in Louisville or Minneapolis, or historically in Chicago, frankly. But we do have, if you look at racial data about arrests and stops and so forth, we have very, very disparate law enforcement practices here in Evanston that's directly tied to the residential segregation. And that has a huge impact on particularly the quality of life and opportunity that young Black men have. And we've got to tackle all those issues as well. And so it's a lot of things on our plate, and they're all interwoven, right? They create this system of racism, the system of just radically different opportunity that different people whose skin or different color experience, and we've got to tackle them all simultaneously and be honest about the fact, and this is hard sometimes for people to accept, but honest about the fact that solving the problems, or at least improving the situation, is going to involve people who don't think they're at fault giving something up. And that's always where things get difficult. And so I think the city should be really proud for having taken steps on reparations, right? Because that's one of those things where it's the right thing to do for sure, but it's been politically difficult in a lot of places because some folks say, well, I personally am not to blame, so why should I be paying for reparations? And I think we've cleared that hurdle in Evanston, to our credit, but we got to name the fact that we're going to have to continue clearing that hurdle, and the people who have been kind of quietly benefiting from structural racism are going to have to be willing to give that up. In fact, they're going to have to fight to give that up in order to solve the problem.
One of the big topics going around is defunding. I prefer to say police reform. I don't even want to say the word defund. The police. Our situation in Evanston by far doesn't look like the situation in other cities, in Chicago and in other cities. I can say we have some great police officers, but we also have some police officers here in Evanston that got some issues, definitely. And I believe that the officers themselves experience racism within the department among each other. But they're not allowed to really speak out about those things, talk about those things. What is your plan for this with dealing with the police department? I'll say this, the situations that I was not happy with, that was very disturbing, was the situation with Devon Reed, City Clerk Devon Reed, when he was petitioning to get on the ballot.
Sure.
Yeah.
That was terrible.
Yeah, that was bad. And I don't think people are really acknowledging how serious that was, and what happened with Ian Beatty, 12-year-old Ian Beatty, the PhD student in Northwestern. I mean, we have had some serious issues here, and those men are probably still dealing with that trauma of what happened to them and the slander of their character, and it's out there in the internet forever. What is your plan? Because I know it's got to be hard for a leader in the community to have this conversation with the police department about reform, and then you got the community like, do something, how do you handle that as a leader in the community?
It's a great question. And I want to start just by acknowledging something really important you said. I know there are folks out there who will say that now that we have an African-American chief, we've solved the problem of racism inside the department. Guys, it's not that simple. And I think that it is a good thing that we have Chief Cook in that position. I think it's been a real step in the right direction. But that's not a magic wand to solve these, generations old kind of habits of racism inside policing. So I want to thank you for naming that. Here's the way I think about this big question. Part of it is kind of the part that you talked about. There's folks who do a great job and are genuinely committed to a community vision of policing, and there's still some problems, and you've got to just root out the problems one at a time and be, pretty zero tolerance about, officers who are acting in an irresponsible way. But I think there's a different question that's worth stepping back and asking, which is not how many good and bad officers do we have in the police force in Evanston compared to Chicago, compared to Minneapolis, compared to Louisville, but instead asking, how do we do public safety? Because in my view, public safety and policing don't mean the same thing, right? The police, those are the folks who they get a badge, they get a gun, they get handcuffs, they can show up and use lethal force in times that are considered justified even. And they can also show up and arrest you and take away your liberty and put you in a cage. That's a very specific set of tools that they can deploy, and nobody else in the government gets to do that, right? Someone who shows up from the Department of Health doesn't get to also put handcuffs on you, doesn't get to also bring a gun to your home. Mm-hmm. And so when we kind of think that policing and public safety are the same, what we're actually saying is that the way to solve the safety problem is with violence. And what I would say is that I believe we need police, but I think they're a relatively, circumscribed part of the broader solution to the problem of public safety, which includes de-escalation and intervention and counseling and much more robust mental health services. And so to me, that's the question that we got to answer. We got to have a real community discussion about what a real holistic public safety strategy for the city of Evanston looks like, and then right size the portion of that strategy that requires a sworn officer with the right to make an arrest and bring a gun, but also right size the rest of it, which is the more human, more supportive part of a public safety system. And I think when we get confused and act like policing is the whole public safety program, that's when we get in trouble. And then, by the way, we start to ask cops to do more than they are trained to do. And we ask them to take on more and more responsibilities, and they become therapists and they become counselors. And that's both unfair to the police officer and unfair to the person who needs those services. That's the direction that I want to go in actually solving these problems.
What do you think of, I was on a police reform Zoom for Chicago. It was hosted by Representative LaShawn Ford and Senator Lightford. And I had put out there, I truly believe that the police officers need far more training, like longer time. So it takes a college student 4 years, to get a business degree in business, but a police officer that's handling this, weapon and handling people's lives in these emergencies, it's like less than a year. What are your thoughts on that, on them having to stay in training for a far longer time period?
I think there's a lot of reforms like that make sense. I think more training absolutely makes sense. I think more diversity in our police forces and up and down the ranks is important. I think more kind of training specific to the kinds of, let's um, generously say unconscious bias that the police officers have sometimes demonstrated is important as well. But I think doing those things by themselves and leaving the system the way it is in other respects isn't going to solve the problem. Because I think as long as we're spending as much as we're spending on this one specific type of public safety effort, and then asking these police officers to do so many different things all at once, yeah, that impossible job becomes a little bit easier with more training, but it's still probably an impossible job. So I would say let's make sure we redesign the system so we're giving them a possible job, and then let's train them all the way up so they do it well.
Okay, and I had a question that they didn't get to, so I would love to hear your thoughts on it, and we'll move on to another topic. Because there is racism throughout, I believe, every police department in the country. I mean, it just exists. White supremacists have infiltrated the police department, so, they don't wear their white sheets or swastikas and all of that. Now they have on police badges. How can we clean the system out? I mean, we have it here in Evanston. How do you clean that out? How do you go in and clean house? Would that be in the training where you like really do some psychological training and serious background check to see what their history, their past is? How do we clean house of that? Because they're there.
Yeah. Changing culture is so hard, right? And that's what you're talking about fundamentally. You're talking about a culture that has existed too often inside policing, and we need to change that. So this is a place where I think having people of color, and especially African Americans in leadership, is really important. But they need to be empowered to exercise their authority, and part of it is in the recruitment and the training of new people coming in. But look, part of it's also in dealing with folks who are already there. And, it is difficult in an environment where someone's job is dangerous to say, okay, well, also zero tolerance, right? The tendency that our society has had is to say, gosh, these folks have difficult jobs. They're putting their lives in danger. They're under a tremendous amount of stress. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Look, as a human being, I respect that instinct. But when it comes to white supremacy, we need to have a zero tolerance policy, period. And as you indicated by talking about how the sheets and the robes and the hoods are gone, white supremacy can exist in a lot of ways that are not 100% overt, right? Like you can see it, you can tell it's there, but they're not 100% overt. And so then when you've got your evidence that you put before the disciplinary board, it maybe doesn't look, it looks like kind of, each side has a case to make. And we just need to be really, really aggressive about saying, look, here's some statistics about who is stopped and who is arrested. And we know that that's not reflective of who Evanston is. And therefore, there must be some mismatch in terms of how the function of policing is carried out. And until that mismatch gets eliminated, we're just going to have to be very, very, very hands-on with a lot of accountability about what kind of structural racism is being allowed to persist inside the department. But it's a hard job. It's not. Yes. This is not a kind of check these 3 things off your list and then you finish that task. This is about the slow, difficult work of culture change and accountability.
Yes. So what's your overall vision for Evanston? Overall, like, here's a couple questions within a question.
Yeah.
I'm infamous for that. So.
Because you're good at your job.
Thank you. So, just looking at Evanston right now, what would you build upon that's really going great? What would you change? And what does Daniel Biss want to bring to the table that's just hasn't been a concept or a thought or done yet here in Evanston?
So I think Evanston is a really desirable place in a lot of ways, right? And let's just name them, right? It's a suburb that borders the city. So whether that's for your job or the cultural amenities of the city, it's right there. You know, it's not like living in Crystal Lake or something where it's a real project to get to Chicago. It's a suburb that is large enough that we have our own vibrant cultural life here, truly vibrant. It is, for all the kind of caveats that we put on this earlier in the discussion, a truly diverse community. It's sitting right there on the lake, and for all the double-edged sword that many people see this as having, it's also got a giant world-class university that causes a lot of vibrancy as well. So Evanston is a very, very attractive, desirable place where people want to be, and that's great, and we need to build on that. But then what we need to do is make it accessible to more people, right? It's not affordable to as many people as it should be. And there's that, what some people call the sort of missing middle, where there's less and less availability of middle class housing. There's plenty of $1 million houses in Evanston, but there's less housing available to middle class families. And you see this just in terms of the number of people, who have migrated to Skokie, right? It's not that far away, but have found Skokie a little bit more affordable. And so I think we need to really work on affordability, and affordability across the city, right? Where there needs to be affordable housing in every part of the city, and there needs to be true diversity in every part of the city. And I think that is achievable given our assets, and I think it's achievable given the preferences and values of the people of Evanston, but we're not going to do it without making some difficult choices that are going to ruffle some feathers, and that's what makes me want to run. The other thing that I think is critical to say is we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that has taken lives from us in Evanston in ways that break all of our hearts. I'm sad to say that I don't think we have any ability to say that's finished yet. I think this pandemic may well take more lives from us in Evanston before it's through. Additionally, it's changed our lives in ways that have been very, very difficult for many, many people. And it's been pretty economically problematic as well. And you see the number of vacant storefronts and previously thriving commercial areas in Evanston. And so we're also going to have to really figure out how this coronavirus is going to force economic adjustments and figure out what a revitalization is going to look like. And I think there's a lot of pretty hard open questions there, right? So some people think that this is the remote work revolution and no one's going to go to offices anymore. Some people think that it's going to go right back to how it was in February of 2020. I think both of those groups of people are wrong. I think we're going to build something that's a bit of a hybrid, that's a little bit different. And I think we have to figure out what kind of economic development strategy is going to work for Evanston in the new world that we don't fully yet understand. That's going to require moving quickly as we get more and more information, and it's going to require, I think, a lot of really serious hard work. So to me, we've got this, the sort of summary of the answers. We have these amazing assets that are accessible to too few people and suffer from too much segregation. So we need to make Evanston affordable to more people, and we need to make all of Evanston affordable to more people. And then we have to figure out how we're going to come out of this pandemic stronger than we were before, knowing what the new world looks like and adjusting and preparing ourselves for that new world.
Wow, I love that answer. We're not going to go back to the way that it was. We're not going to go totally remote. It's going to be something new. That actually excites me. It does.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, that excites me. Because I feel like we're stepping into the unknown, and I think it's going to be good. And I'll be watching the debates tonight, and oh my God. Oh, November can't get here fast enough. I swear.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's the other thing. We're talking about an April election. There's a pretty important election happening a long time before April that I think most of us are paying most of our attention to these days.
Right. This is going to have a huge impact on your vision.
Absolutely.
On your vision, what you can actually do, what you can't do. I believe one candidate is going to put a lot of restriction and limitation on us, and The other is gonna open it up. I think he thinks more like you, like we're stepping into something new, you know.
Well, I agree with that, and I would also say that just on a, there's a lot at stake in this November election, to say the least, right? But one thing that's kind of not about the values and the character of our nation, which is the number one item, but for me as a future mayor is very much on my mind, is the federal government needs to pass a law to help municipalities deal with this coronavirus, and they've just been sitting on that responsibility for months now. I'm worried that if we don't have the outcome that I'm hoping for in the November election, we also may not have a federal government that is able to respond appropriately to the situation and give cities the help they need. Every city in the country needs help. I'm very sympathetic to ideological fights and fights between Democrats and Republicans. I've got my own strong views on that I'm happy to share if folks are interested. But the question of, does the federal government need to help cities out right now, should not be a partisan question at all.
Right.
And they somehow have turned that into a partisan question. And I worry a lot that if we allow 4 more years of them holding up aid to cities for some crazy partisan reason, cities are going to have trouble surviving.
So if you were given $1 million, say you're mayor tomorrow, and the government says, here's $1 million to help Evanston, what would you do with that $1 million?
Well, we need to help people. We need to help businesses, right? I mean, there's people who are. I mean, if I'm mayor tomorrow and I get that money tomorrow, the truth of the matter is that most of it I would spend on unemployment, because the expanded unemployment checks that also should be coming separately from the federal government, those aren't coming anymore, and people are hurting. People are hurting, and to me, that's got to be the first priority. Now, in a sane world, the federal government would re-up those unemployment checks, because we have these record levels of unemployment and people need the help, and businesses aren't coming back yet because the virus is still out there. And if the federal government were taking care of that, then the next priorities are, of course, the public health infrastructure that allows us to do the testing and tracing and keeping people safe, and helping businesses that are just teetering on the edge because their customers are temporarily gone, and they're employers in Evanston. They add to the character of the community, and they were successful in Evanston until March, but they can't be successful now until this thing ends, and they need to be given the help required to tide them over.
Okay, I got you for 1 more minute, so I'm gonna get 1 more question in there.
Sorry, I talked too long. I apologize.
No, your responses have been it gives me some hope. It gives me some hope because we're in such uncertain times right now. So one of the biggest complaints I hear doing Evanston Live TV from the community is the amount of money that's been spent on development. So, a lot of people are upset about Robert Crown. Robert Crown is a beautiful center, and unfortunately, we're unable to really use it because of COVID. So it's like just money, $54 million. It's just been a lot of different developments that have gone up where people have felt like, wow, that money could have gone to so many other things. And now there's no money to send checks to people in Evanston. Yeah. At least we're told there's no money to help people in Evanston. I mean, Evanston Community Foundation, they've been angels. They've helped the homeless. They've helped the seniors. But many people feel like the city wasn't really there for, the regular person in the middle, who, and so much money is still going to possible developments like a new civic center, and and we're in COVID. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? I know many people want to hear what are your thoughts on that, especially with COVID happening right now, and people, like you said, are suffering.
Well, I think the basic way to think about this is the city of Evanston has budget challenges, and so we've got to be really ruthless about prioritizing. And to me, you put people first. And right now, people are hurting, and so you put the people who are hurting at the absolute front of the line. And hopefully we'll come out of this. But even I know that when we come out of this, the social service needs of Evanston are very, very significant. And there is real poverty. There has been long before the coronavirus, real poverty and real suffering in Evanston. And so, you know, going forward, when I'm the mayor and we're asked to make these tough decisions, you know, I tend to say, make sure we're lifting up the people who need the most help first. And it's hard for me to push that priority aside for something that helps people who are less in need. That's just sort of the way that I approach things. What's the greatest need? Who needs the most help? And how do we direct as much of our resource as possible to the people who need the most?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Daniel. I think you've answered a lot of concerns on people's hearts here in Evanston. We'll be sure to have you back on as the election in Evanston picks up. I know Haggerty hasn't announced if he's running or not. I haven't heard of anyone else.
There's a young man by the name of Sebastian Knowles who's got a website up, and I know he's circulating petitions.
Okay.
I haven't met him yet, but I hope to have a chance to meet him. And like you said, Mayor Haggerty hasn't made his announcement yet. So, you know, we'll have to wait and see what his plans are. So unclear what the field is, but like we said, you know, I think a lot of folks are focused on a November election, and maybe we'll be giving more attention to this after that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
and
you.
You're a busy man and you're getting out there, and we do appreciate you like calling around and listening to the people, wanting to hear what's on our hearts, on our minds, on our souls. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you for being willing to share, and thank you for having me today also. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
All right.